As a bar mitzvah gift, my mother's good friend Sally, affectionately known as Tanta Sadie, gave me a small gold mezuzah on a chain. My mother was less than pleased. "Wear it under your shirt so that no one sees it," my mother cautioned. She was afraid it would cause me to get beaten up. But I was not sure who was going to beat me up in our almost entirely Jewish neighborhood in the Bronx. Was she afraid that some boy from the conservative synagogue would beat me up, a boy from the Reformed temple? But so ingrained were her experiences of anti-Semitism while living in the South during World War II that years later, she feared for my safety even in our Jewish enclave. She accompanied my father to South Carolina, where he was stationed before being shipped off to the Pacific. Accommodations were scarce, and my mother found herself renting a room in a boarding house. At night, all of the residents joined together for a communal dinner. One night, all of a sudden, my mother felt someone's hands touching her head. "Did you have them removed?" she was asked. You know. My mother, born and bred in her own Jewish enclave of Midwood, Brooklyn, had no idea what this woman was talking about. Of course, the woman was referring to the old anti-Semitic trope that some of you are familiar with, of Jews having horns on their heads. Given the current rise in anti-Semitic attitudes, not to mention anti-Semitic attacks, this trope seems almost quaint. For years, we told the story in my family and laughed. In better times, we might simply have chalked this up to some woman's naivete. But these are not better times. In 1964, 29% of Americans held anti-Jewish attitudes. Over time, that number went down to as low as 9%. We attributed this not only to the promise America held, but our devotion to the country that provided a home to our parents, grandparents, and great-grandparents. But when last measured in 2022, the percent of Americans expressing anti-Jewish attitudes had risen to 20%. This past year has been a year like no other for the Jewish community. Last year, anti-Semitic incidents increased by an astonishing 873%. This translates into one anti-Semitic incident every hour of every day of 2023. All 50 states reported anti-Semitic incidents. Campus anti-Semitism, a problem long before October 7th, is now out of control. 73% of college students have experienced or witnessed anti-Semitism. Last year, 1,400 incidents of anti-Semitic activity were reported on over 300 colleges and universities. We have become hesitant to engage in conversations about Israel with our non-Jewish friends and neighbors. Horrified by the posts we see on social media, we have wondered how to respond to those we thought were our friends, or who at least shared our concerns. We hope the conversations with coworkers will stick to sports and Netflix and stay away from the day's headlines over the Middle East. Anti-Semitism has once again become fashionable, this time with an obsession over Zionism and the war in Gaza. This summer, Colin and I were on vacation in Montreal. On our first day there, after dinner, we strolled along a pedestrian thoroughfare. Closed to cars, People filled the street. But before we knew it, we, along with others, were pushed to the side to make way for marchers. It was a protest against the war in Gaza, and according to their chants, accusing Israel of genocide. Many of the marchers wore masks to hide their identity. In short order, the protest turned violent. We sought refuge by a Starbucks, only to find ourselves just feet away from a protester with a bat smashing the store window. Riot police tried to restore a semblance of order, and tear gas filled the air. We were fortunate to make our way to a side street, away from the violence and the shattered glass. I couldn't help but wonder, what if we wore kippur? Or what if my mezuzah was visible? What if I were wearing one of my shirts from Camp Harlem with Hebrew lettering on the back? Would we have become targets? Protesters often claim they are anti-Zionist and not anti-Semitic. But in the heat of the moment, would they have differentiated between the two? So what are we to do? Yes, of course, it is incumbent upon all of us to stay informed and educated, and we must not bury our heads in the sand. Last year, I was joined by several congregants for the Anti-Defamation League's annual Never Is Now conference. Held in New York City, it is a 2-day crash course in anti-Semitism, what it looks like right now, and what we can do about it. It was truly eye-opening. This year, the conference is on March 3rd and 4th. I hope that some of you will join me. There are actually save-the-date cards outside the sanctuary doors, and we will be happy to offer scholarships to those interested in attending. And yes, we must prepare our children, especially those in high school and college, for what they may face on campuses that have become protest sites. We might also choose to tuck our mezuzah or Star of David neatly and securely under our clothes. If we wear a yellow ribbon to show our solidarity with the hostages held in Gaza, we may choose to wear that ribbon only in Jewish spaces where we will not have to explain it or be fearful. We may decide not to put up a mezuzah on our door or even go so far as to take one down. We might feel that if we are patient, we will ride out this recent wave of anti-Semitism. But there are those who would suggest otherwise. There are those who would say that using that very metaphor of a wave is exactly the wrong thing to do. Rabbi Prosnett shared with me the work of Sharon Rose Goldsvik. She is an activist and strategist. In our attempts to both understand and explain anti-Semitism, we often use metaphors, especially those that compare anti-Semitism to a virus or water. You know, it's a virus that is spreading, or a rising tide of anti-Semitic incidents. Now, according to Goldsvik, these are flawed metaphors. They suggest that anti-Semitism is part of nature and something that will never go away, something that cannot be stopped, just tamped down from time to time. While we do this to soften the existential danger that anti-Semitism poses, we do so at our own risk. Fearing that anti-Semitism will never go away will only lead to anti-Semitism never going away. Rather, Goldsvik says anti-Semitism is a part of the machinery of division and fear created and used for specific political purposes and material gain. This was the tactic of the Ku Klux Klan, of the Third Reich, and of white supremacists. It is not so much that anti-Semites hate Jews, but that they want to keep us from working together with others to win the things we all need, like freedom, safety, and belonging. They would seek to turn neighbors against each other and to exploit differences in order to gain political power. It is about creating division based on religion, skin color, and how long one has lived here. Whether around the dinner table, in conversation with our neighbors, or our posts on social media, these are all important points for us to be making. Anti-Semitism is not natural, it is not normal, and it is not inevitable. So what do we do in the face of anti-Semitism? Well, first we have to speak up, at least when it is safe. We should never put ourselves in physical danger. But we should not be afraid of ruffling a few feathers or losing a friend. When we hear something anti-Semitic, we can simply ask, "What did you mean by that?" Or, "Where did you get your information?" We can respond with facts and challenge hateful remarks by suggesting that everyone should be treated respectfully. Secondly, when we see or experience acts of anti-Semitism or hate, we must report it. We can no longer brush these things off or downplay their harm. That may mean reporting bias to a supervisor, a teacher, the police, or the ADL. Our own fear of discomfort must not deter us from doing something. Third, even though as a community, we may feel that we have lost many of our allies, this is no time to return the favor. In fact, more than ever, we must still show up for others. As Goldsvik points out, the goal of anti-Semitism is to sow seeds of discord, to turn neighbor against neighbor. We win by showing up for others, even when, and perhaps especially when, we feel they have not shown up for us. And fourth, we must check our own biases. Let's face it, we all have them. But we must be open to hearing the experiences of others and to challenging our own biases. What is the language we use when talking about others? Do we stereotype others or make assumptions based on someone's ethnicity, country of origin, religion, gender, sexual orientation? We cannot ask of others what we are unwilling to do ourselves. And there is something else that we can do. Jonathan Greenblatt, CEO of the ADL, reminds us that this is not Nazi Germany or Moscow of 1972. Anti-Semitism is neither a product of the right nor the left. And despite the current moment, the United States is still the most resilient and welcoming society that Jews have ever lived in. The answer is not to retreat or hide, but to be proud of Judaism and Zionism. Greenblatt is not the only one to advocate this approach. Perhaps no one has spent more time thinking about and combating anti-Semitism than Deborah Lipstadt. Lipstadt serves as the State Department's special envoy to monitor and combat anti-Semitism. She is currently on leave from Emory University, where she is a professor of modern Jewish history and Holocaust studies. Lipstadt tells the story of a student of hers who one day showed up to class wearing a kippah when he had not worn one before. She writes, he proclaimed that with anti-Semitism rising, he was intent on showing haters that they could not frighten him. Rather than hiding, he told me he would tell the world that he was a Jew. Now, rather than being happy about this decision, Lipstadt was saddened. Saddened that he had been pushed into a level of observance rather than being pulled closer to traditional practice out of a sense of devotion. That reactive stance, she wrote, cannot be the sole response. What is Lipstadt's prescription to fight anti-Semitism? She says we must begin by changing our perspective. The reactive stance cannot be the sole response, she writes. Our job should be to flip that equation on its head toward a proactive embrace of all that Judaism has to offer, its values, its moral teachings, its pursuit of justice. We need to embrace approaches that are Jewish by tradition, she says, yet universal in their application. Greeting each new moment with a prayer, gathering for each meal with a note of gratitude, reveling in the dynamic facets of our faith, not out of fear, but out of joy. The truth is that periods of increased anti-Semitism lead to increased engagement with Jewish life. According to the Federations of North America, since October 7th, more than 4 in 10 American Jews have either sought out or engaged more with Jewish life. Jews are going to synagogue and JCC programs. Registration for Jewish camps has gone up. Shabbat dinners at Hillels across the country are seeing greater attendance, and the Reform movement is seeing an increased interest in conversion, with 3,000 people across the United States and Canada taking Introduction to Judaism classes. I have no doubt that many of you have found yourselves at Temple more this past year, attended programs with Jewish content more often, and have paid closer attention to news articles about Israel and anti-Semitism. We win by living rich and meaningful Jewish lives. If we don a Star of David, it is not to proclaim our Jewishness, but our pride in a way of life that teaches us to care for the widow, the orphan, the stranger. If we put up a mezuzah on our door, it is not to say this home is occupied by Jews, but that this is a home built on the sacred value of living by and teaching our children that everyone is created in the image of God. We win by learning, by being part of a sacred community, by living by Jewish time, and by doing the work to make the world a better place. In his New York Times opinion piece, The Year American Jews Woke Up, Bret Stephens eloquently wrote, "To have been born a Jew is the single most fortunate thing that has ever happened to me," he writes. "It is a priceless moral, spiritual, intellectual, and emotional inheritance from my ancestors, some of whom have been slaughtered for it, and those of you who have relatives who died in the Holocaust know exactly what he means. It is a precious bequest to my children who will make it their own. It is therefore worth the time it takes to explore and worth the cost, including, tragically, the cost in bigotry and violence it so often extracts of us." All these years later, I still have the mezuzah given to me by Tanta Sadie. It has traveled the world with me. And because, as my mother asked, I wear it under my shirt, and you have probably never seen it. But here it is. I don't wear it to tell the world I am a Jew. I wear it to remind myself how proud I am to be a Jew. Shana Tova.